Imagine boarding a plane with your daughter right beside you. You fall asleep, wake up, and she's gone. Vanished. But here's the terrifying part. The flight crew, the passengers, even the official flight records insist, your daughter was never on this plane. Was she ever real? The scene opens in Berlin. Kyle Pratt is with her young daughter, Julia. They sit briefly in a courtyard. Julia asks where her room will be, and Kyle suggests they share her old childhood room for a while. Kyle urges Julia back to sleep, reminding her of the big day ahead. As they prepare to leave, Julia expresses fear about going outside. Kyle reassures her, offering to hide her under her coat, carrying her on her shoulder the whole way. Julia asks about the food in America, specifically if her grandparents have toast. Kyle assures her they do. They arrive at Berlin International Airport amidst standard security announcements. Julia wanders off briefly, alarming Kyle, who finds her looking at snacks. Julia points out a massive airplane, an E-474, and Kyle proudly explains that she helps design its engines. Julia worries about the workers high up on the plane, but Kyle reassures her they won't fall. Their flight, Alto 9583, is called for passengers with small children. Kyle gives Julia her own ticket to hold until they board. On the jet bridge, they pass a family with unruly children arguing. Inside the plane, Kyle navigates to their seats, row 26, right-hand side. The flight attendant, Stephanie, welcomes them aboard. Nearby, the same unruly kids continue to bicker, prompting sarcastic comments from another passenger about wishing they'd use bricks. Stephanie notes the potentially high-maintenance passengers in row 25 to her colleague Bill, who remarks that even people 2 planes away could hear them. He reassures Stephanie it's okay to dislike passengers sometimes. Another flight attendant mentions Frankfurt Airport has shut down, but thankfully their flight isn't going there, though delays are possible due to de-icing. An announcement apologizes for the delay. Julia asks about the noise outside, and Kyle explains it's the de-icing process. She tells Julia to sleep, promising they'll be in New York when she wakes up, and reassures her that Daddy will be there too, metaphorically. Kyle watches the plane take off, holding Julia's hand. Later in the flight, Kyle asks a nearby passenger if he minds her stretching out into the empty seats in the last rows with her daughter. He doesn't mind. Kyle then wakes up suddenly. Julia is gone. The movie playing nearby isn't very funny, remarks the passenger next to her. Kyle asks him if he saw a little girl go by. He hasn't. She realizes they've been flying for over 3 hours. Kyle begins searching, asking a flight attendant, Stephanie, if she can help. Stephanie mentions seeing a girl in the lounge, but Kyle clarifies her daughter is only 6, sandy-haired, likely carrying a one-armed chenille bear. Stephanie confirms the girl in the lounge isn't Julia and hasn't seen her. Kyle continues down the aisle, apologizing as she passes passengers and crew serving drinks. Another flight attendant asks her to use the other aisle, but Kyle explains she's looking for her daughter, who couldn't have gone far. She checks the restrooms, growing more frantic. A different flight attendant asks if something is wrong. Kyle explains she's looking for her 6-year-old daughter. The attendant hasn't seen her. Stephanie makes an announcement asking passengers to check if Julia Pratt, 6 years old in a navy jumper, is near them. One passenger mutters that children should wear cowbells. No one responds to the announcement. Kyle insists they need to search the plane properly. Closets, galleys, crew quarters, holds. She points out kids can hide in unexpected places. Stephanie tries to calm her, suggesting Julia is okay, but Kyle insists she isn't herself after a recent trauma. Kyle requests the seatbelt signs be turned on to clear the aisles for a search. A flight attendant, Fiona, expresses reluctance, but Kyle insists. Fiona agrees to speak to the captain. While waiting, Fiona asks if Kyle is in the airline business due to her knowledge of aircraft design. Kyle confirms she's a propulsion engineer, recently departed from Elgin Air based in Berlin. Kyle emphasizes the problem isn't her anxiety, but her missing daughter. Fiona, relating through her nieces, promises to help find her, noting she's good at hide-and-seek. Kyle asks the rowdy kids from earlier if they saw her daughter. They haven't, but are eager to help look, calling it awesome. Their father quickly shuts them down, stating Julia can't be that lost on a plane. He tells them to turn around. The captain arrives. Before Kyle can speak to him, another passenger jokes about the 5-across seating with her, recognizing her as an engineer. The captain, Rich, asks Kyle for details. She explains Julia is missing. He asks Stephanie if she has any information. Kyle demands to know what they aren't telling her. Captain Rich gently informs Kyle that, according to the ground crew and the manifest, Julia Pratt never boarded the flight. Kyle is incredulous. She insists they were the first two passengers, walking right past the flight attendants at the door. The captain shows her the passenger manifest. Julia isn't listed. Seat 26A, where Kyle says Julia sat, is listed as unoccupied. The head count confirmed this. Kyle argues a mistake was made. She searches her pocket for Julia's boarding pass but finds only her own. She realizes Julia's backpack, which was in the overhead bin, is also missing. She argues Julia wasn't tall enough to get it herself. Someone must have taken her and her belongings. Air Marshal Gene Carson steps forward, having been seated nearby. The captain asks if Kyle had alcohol or medication. Kyle admits she took 2 Klonopin for anxiety that morning, prescribed a week ago after her husband died. She explains they are bringing his body back from Berlin to Long Island for burial. He fell from their building's roof 6 days prior. A crew member confirms there's a casket listed from Kaiser Wilhelm Hospital in the cargo hold. The captain asks if anyone on board remembers seeing Julia, specifically passengers in her row or Carson himself. No one has said so. Carson confirms he did not see the girl. All 32 children listed on the manifest have been accounted for. Kyle desperately argues that she couldn't have imagined bringing Julia on board. She points out the teddy bear under the blanket earlier, insisting Julia wouldn't leave without it. She pleads with the captain, explaining Julia's fragile state after her father's death, how scared she is, how Kyle had to coax her onto the plane. She admits falling asleep, but insists Julia was beside her, holding her hand during takeoff. She begs him to help her find Julia. Moved, or perhaps following procedure, Captain Rich orders a full search. Lights up, passengers seated, check every closet, bin, look for the backpack and boarding pass. Flight attendants begin the search, moving through the cabin, checking overhead bins and closets. Passengers grumble about the inconvenience. One remarks, it's not like she lost her Palm Pilot. The search seems thorough but yields nothing. Carson escorts Kyle, who grows increasingly frustrated. He tries to manage her, reminding her he's responsible for flight safety, which includes dealing with potential threats, even women with imaginary children. Kyle confronts him, asking what he'll do when they find Julia, pointing out that if a crime occurred and he did nothing, it would look bad for him. Kyle suddenly recognizes 2 male passengers. She asks a flight attendant, "Do I know you from somewhere?" The attendant dismisses her. Kyle then confronts the 2 men directly, accusing them of staring into her daughter's window the previous night in Berlin. Carson intervenes. The men vehemently deny seeing Kyle or her daughter before. One states he was at the Hilton on business, producing a bill as proof. He criticizes Kyle for losing her child and blaming others. Carson, seemingly satisfied by the bill, tells Kyle to back off. The men return to their seats, muttering about being harassed. Carson warns Kyle he can cuff her. Kyle tells Carson she believes those men were surveilling her to kidnap Julia. Carson questions the logic. Why take her on a plane with no escape? And how could they manipulate the manifest without crew involvement? Kyle theorizes it's a hijacking, that she was targeted because of her knowledge of the plane, and Julia is a hostage. Carson dismisses this as absurd, cruelly suggesting her husband's death makes sense now, implying he jumped due to the stress. Kyle insists David fell. The captain approaches again. He has spoken with Kaiser Wilhelm Hospital in Berlin. He solemnly informs Kyle that the morgue director confirmed not only David's death, but also Julia's. According to the report, Julia died from internal injuries sustained in the fall from the roof alongside her father. Kyle breaks down, completely denying it. She insists Julia wasn't there. She was at the park with the nanny. She calls them crazy, insisting she carried Julia on board. The captain expresses deep sympathy, but states his primary responsibility is passenger safety, implying Kyle is unstable and a potential risk. He instructs Air Marshal Carson to escort her back to her seat. As Carson leads her away, a passenger identifies herself as a therapist and offers to talk. Kyle initially resists, saying she doesn't know her. The therapist gently encourages her to grieve, suggesting Kyle's mind might be creating comforting scenarios, walking with David, flying with Julia, to cope with overwhelming pain. Kyle recounts walking through Berlin the previous night, feeling David's presence, then returning home to Julia, who couldn't sleep, and lying with her until she slept. The therapist explains denial, suggesting Kyle imagine David and Julia on a beautiful island she can visit mentally. Kyle seems momentarily lost in grief, but then asks to use the restroom to be alone. Carson allows it, telling Stephanie Kyle needs a moment. The therapist reassures them Kyle isn't a threat to herself. Kyle goes into the lavatory. She splashes water on her face. As she looks in the mirror, she notices condensation on the small window beside it. Wiping it clear, she sees a small heart shape drawn on the outside, Julia's signature mark. This confirms Julia was on the plane. Renewed with determination, Kyle looks up. Suddenly, the oxygen masks deploy throughout the cabin, causing panic. Amidst the confusion, Kyle climbs into an access panel in the lavatory ceiling. Carson realizes she's gone. Kyle navigates through the cramped upper crawl space of the plane, the avionics bay area. She calls for Julia. She briefly imagines seeing her deceased husband, David, expressing her fear and inability to find their daughter, feeling helpless as no one believes her. Carson follows her into the upper compartment. He tells her she's done looking and drags her back down. As they re-enter the cabin, Kyle realizes the plane is descending. An announcement confirms an unscheduled stop due to an out-of-control passenger. Kyle realizes they are landing prematurely. She argues with Carson, stating she hasn't checked the attics, avionics, yet. He tells her they've been searched. She insists she hasn't searched them. The plane is landing in Goose Bay, Newfoundland. Kyle confronts Carson again, using logic. How come there's only one coffin down there? If my daughter had died with my husband, I'd be flying 2 coffins home. Wouldn't I? Carson dismisses her, telling her she scared 400 passengers who now face a night in Newfoundland. He informs her she'll be arrested upon landing. Kyle pleads with him, begging him not to let them arrest her, as she'll be the only one left to save Julia. Carson seems unmoved but troubled. The plane lands. FBI and emergency vehicles surround the aircraft. Kyle sits, handcuffed, beside Carson. The captain comes back. Carson asks to speak with him regarding a security matter, leaving Kyle momentarily. The captain returns to Kyle, not with sympathy, but with shocking news. He states Kyle demanded $50 million wired to an account, threatening to detonate explosives hidden in her husband's coffin if her demands weren't met. She supposedly has an accomplice on board with the detonator. The plan, as told to the captain, is to deboard passengers and crew, then provide Kyle with a G-3 jet. The search for Julia was apparently a ruse. The captain believes Kyle is dangerously disturbed, possibly having killed both her husband and daughter. He instructs Carson to keep her calm, follow her demands for now, deboarding, and they will take her down once the plane is clear. Carson goes to speak privately with Stephanie, the flight attendant. Stephanie is panicking. Jean, she knows. She knows the kids in avionics. She knows that I'm a part of this. Carson tells her to calm down, asking if Kyle explicitly mentioned avionics, or if Stephanie let anything slip. Both say no. He reassures her the plan is working perfectly. Kyle has inadvertently made everyone believe Arab terrorists might be involved, which provides cover. He reminds Stephanie that Kyle will be dead minutes after landing, found with a detonator in her hand, framed as the hijacker. The crucial evidence, Julia, will be vaporized by the explosives planted near her in the avionics bay. Carson returns to Kyle. The captain announces the money has been wired and confirms the transfer code with Carson. As the final descent begins, Carson removes Kyle's handcuffs, stating the FBI is en route and will handle the missing person situation, detaining and questioning everyone, including the crew. He assures her 2 agents will board to help search for Julia. This seems like a change of heart, a moment of belief. However, as they approach the exit door, surrounded by authorities outside, Carson tells Kyle to keep quiet and not antagonize anyone, reminding her people expect her arrest. Kyle, likely having overheard parts of Carson's conversation with Stephanie or piecing things together, suddenly grabs Carson, threatening him. "Touch me again, you're dead." She refuses to deboard. The captain confirms the crew can deboard. Kyle stops him, demanding to talk. She tells the captain his story about her demanding money is false. The captain, believing Carson's version, dismisses her pretense of the missing child. Carson tries to escort Kyle off, but she resists, challenging him. "You want to play? Let's play. I want my daughter." She demands the crew deboard first. She threatens to expose Carson as the real hijacker, mentioning whatever he has in his pocket, presumably the detonator. Cornered, Carson yields. Kyle demands his gun. Carson reluctantly hands it over. The captain, still believing Kyle is the hijacker, wishes Carson Godspeed. Now armed and in control, Kyle forces Carson back into the plane. "Where is she? Where'd you put her? She's in avionics, isn't she?" Carson denies it, trying to de-escalate, telling her it's over, no one is coming, she's just the crazy lady. Kyle confronts him, stating her husband didn't jump or fall, implying Carson killed him. Carson admits it wasn't personal. They needed the coffin because it wouldn't be X-rayed, and needed a credible hijacker familiar with the plane. Kyle fit the profile perfectly. He callously remarks that no one cared when they drugged Julia and shoved her into a food bin during boarding. Kyle forces Carson towards the forward galley, the access point to the avionics bay below. Stephanie is there, guarding the unconscious Julia. Carson holds the actual detonator. Kyle asks Stephanie if she really wants to kill a little girl, suggesting Carson enjoys the violence more. Carson threatens Julia. Kyle creates a diversion, perhaps feigning surrender or using a bluff. She manages to lock Carson inside the avionics bay with the explosives and the still unconscious Julia. Carson yells, "What are you going to do? Blow us up?" Kyle, shielding Julia behind equipment, replies, "No, just you." She triggers the detonation from outside the sealed compartment. A contained explosion rips through the avionics bay, killing Carson. Smoke billows from the plane. Outside, the FBI and crew watch in horror, assuming Kyle blew herself up. Then, Kyle emerges from the smoke, carrying Julia in her arms. Everyone is stunned. The captain realizes the truth. My God, she's holding her daughter. Later, wrapped in blankets inside the airport terminal, Kyle comforts the waking Julia. The captain approaches, deeply apologetic. An official informs Kyle that the morgue director in Berlin has been detained, implicated in falsifying the report, and asks if she can identify his picture later. Kyle asks if it can wait. She carries Julia towards the exit. A flight attendant remarks, "I told you there was a little girl." Another adds, "She never gave up." Julia, drowsy, asks, "Are we there yet?" Kyle softly replies, "Not yet, almost," and lifts her daughter onto her hip, walking towards the exit, finally safe and vindicated.